we're not like the Soviet Union, even if we share some of the symptoms, right? Again, you could have dengue fever or malaria, different diseases, a lot of the same symptoms. A panic attack and a heart attack look similar, but they're caused by different things. I'm a Joseph Schumpeter guy. And Joseph Schumpeter, you know, he basically has this prediction in Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy that Western democracies are essentially that socialism is kind of inevitable because of the problem of wealth, not the problem of poverty, which is that the children or grandchildren of the big industrialists and the robber baron types, although I hate the phrase robber baron, they end up taking a sledgehammer to the very soapboxes that they stand on. They end up becoming part of the adversarial class. That's where the new class this new class idea has lots of fathers, but that's part of it. And so you end up getting these sort of asshole trustafarian socialist grandkids of the founders of Ford or Carnegie Mellon and all these kinds of, or Carnegie and that kind of thing. And you can see that kind of thing all over the place. These radicals who end up biting the hand that feeds them and disliking their own country because they are saturated in these academic environments that we both deplore with these adversarial anti-American ideologies. And this is partly the, I mean, I remember you once saying that you agreed a lot with Marx. You just took the side of the bourgeoisie in his analysis. I'm with you on this. But one of the problems with the bourgeoisie is the bourgeoisie get bored. The bourgeoisie start having, and boredom is one of the great threats to peace and prosperity. And, so it wasn't, as Deirdre McCloskey likes to say, it wasn't the coal workers and the car plant factory workers who were picking up the paving stones in 1968 and hurling them through windows. It was the petit bourgeois. It was the college students. It was the chief beneficiaries of Western wealth. And that's a real problem of figuring out a way to sort of curtail that sort of Nietzschean resentment from manifesting itself in our culture. And we see it all over the place. The impulse to shock the bourgeoisie, I think, informs an enormous amount of the asinine ideological culture of elite institutions. These people won the march through the institutions, but they don't actually want to run the institutions. They want to stay transgressive rebels. And so they're constantly undermining the narrative of the American experience and the American project. That's the Howard Zinn project to a T, is to say that all the good stuff in America is either invisible or was really actually bad. And what we see a lot of these jackass kids on college campuses living down to those ideals. But I will say, as bad as I did not, as you suggested, declare victory. I said that basically there are signs of improvement. I think that whether we've actually passed peak woke or not remains to be seen. But my point would be that democracies, and particularly the American democracy, which is now the oldest democracy in the world and is quite, was quite a stable one, have an enormous capacity for self-correction. Your guy, Adam Smith, he said there's a lot of ruin in a nation. A lot of things are always going bad, and America has this amazing capacity to sort of deal with them. It is not, what I think is pernicious is the idea to say, oh, we're on this inexorable teleological descent of decline like the American empire. People said that in the 1970s. We got a lot richer and stronger since the 1970s. We have the capacity to fix our problems, but it does take identifying our problems accurately. And just lastly, as bad as the DEI stuff and intersectionality stuff and all of that is, and I truly believe it's bad, it does not have the power to ruin people's lives the way the single party state apparatus of the Communist Party did. You can call Don. Oh, I should also point out, you're absolutely right. American elites, left-wing elites, are openly and shamefully hostile to the American experiment and the American story and American civilization generally. I agree with that entirely, and I'll bang my spoon on my high chair about it for the rest of my life. Stipulated. You know who else is? Donald Trump and his biggest superfans. Donald Trump rejected years ago the idea of American exceptionalism. He thinks constitutionalism is for suckers. He thinks essentially democratic norms and institutions are for suckers. And there are an enormous amount of weightlifting, bro, throne-sniffing goobers on the right who buy into all this stuff, telling each other, you know what time it is, and it's the Flight 93 stuff, and that, the Steve Bannon is the only person in this entire political context who matters, at least, who openly calls himself a Leninist. And so I think America has an enormous number of problems, but they are American problems, and they manifest themselves differently on left and right. I always rejected horseshoe theory for most of my life. I now believe it because I think the forces of illiberalism are very strong on the left, and now the right, big chunks of the right, have joined in on it. That's a big problem. It's not a Soviet problem.
As I said, in one system, one party, in the other, two parties, but in both cases, you're given choices between senile candidates for General Secretary or President. The debate last week felt like the clinching exhibit in my case. It's a different system, but somehow the net result is the same. And we don't actually have a candidate who's offering solutions to the problems that we agree are profound. That's what I find most disconcerting. And there's just no sign of a serious political debate about the public finances, about public health. The nomenclature of the political class is so completely irresponsible and indifferent to the fate of American people that they don't even attempt an inquiry into how pathetically badly they handled the COVID pandemic. At least their British counterparts attempted some kind of inquiry into why it was a fiasco. But the United States, which achieved the disruption of lockdowns without any discernible benefit in terms of excess mortality, has simply walked away from any serious inquest into what went wrong. I said in the piece, when you look at COVID, think Chernobyl. And there were Chernobyl-like features of the way that the United States handled the pandemic. In particular, the reluctance of the responsible officials ever to admit any responsibility for any of the things that went wrong. So, yes, I'm more pessimistic than you, Jonah, and that may just be a temperamental feature. I grew up in Scotland, which was where we pioneered hillbilly elegy. It's kind of like we did the pilot before J.D. Vance was even born. We decided, I don't know, let's just deindustrialize and see what happens. And I saw deaths of despair in Glasgow in the 1970s before I knew that that was what they were. And I saw the demoralization of the society in the west of Scotland in the 70s and 80s. And so when I went to Russia, I remember thinking, this does seem familiar. On the other hand, the piles of bodies seem larger here. And so when I went back and I kind of looked, I thought, well, is Scotland really the same story? And it's just doesn't come close. I mean, we just can't compete with Americans now when it comes to suicide. Now, we had a little digression earlier about fentanyl, but it's worth saying that fentanyl's only part of what's driving deaths of despair. When you break down the statistics, you've got about 500,000 suicides, which aren't fentanyl related. You got a ton of people who just shoot themselves. And of course, there's a massive alcoholism problem in the United States that's spread from males to females in recent years. So none of that is novel. I mean, let's not pretend deaths of despair are because fentanyl is new and cheap. Most of what's causing deaths of despair is actually just traditional ways of shortening your life. And I'm still struggling to understand why in a country that has, to the eyes of the rest of the world, the most successful economy, we're supposed to be kind of amazed by the vitality of the US economy, why are so many people killing themselves? I don't have a good answer to that question, except that there's some crisis of morale driving it. You mentioned Schumpeter. The key argument in capitalism, social and democracy is that capitalism has this self-liquidating character. And it's partly, he says, because the bureaucracy and academia are just full of people who quite quickly turn against capitalism and they look for the nearest hand that feeds them to bite. I think that's still compelling. You can see why he had the idea on the Harvard campus, but it still seems to be the case, and perhaps, and certainly on a much greater scale than in Schumpeter's time. So here's the thing that maybe is wrong with podcasts like this one. We're finding ways to disagree when we actually agree about most things. If all we're disagreeing about is how we characterize the pathologies, how we characterize the malaise, and I'm just saying, I can't think of anything like this except the Soviet Union. You're like, well, we're just not like the Soviet Union. That may be it. That may be all this boils down to.